Since it's summertime, we have had the opportunity to go out to a lot more community events and festivals and carnivals and things like that, which have been awesome and a lot of fun. And at such events, it is definitely not a rare experience to witness such a variety of children's behavior, tantrums, throwing fits, and things like that. Obviously, there's good experiences as well and a lot of sweet little children around, but usually at some point there's a couple of instances where you just see kind of a child fall apart or throw a big tantrum or something like that. And it brought to me this thought that honestly, I think I would have benefited to hear as I began on the journey of mothering or parenting, from when your child goes from being a baby who, just is beautiful and wonderful, doesn't do anything and doesn't talk back to you, doesn't have any sort of bad behavior, doesn't really, throw tantrums. And then as they start getting older and older, obviously their personalities come out, their ability to communicate back to you or express emotion to things that they do not like become a lot more explicit. And as a mom, or I guess you could call it a new mom, but just, the first time as a mother, you're encountering your child get into the stage of when they're older and starting to learn new things, there's so much conversation, there's so much talk, there's so much pondering and thinking about, what we need to teach our kids, what skills we want them to learn. And it can be, there's a lot of information. It can be very overwhelming because everybody says that kids need to learn this thing first or that thing first, or, it's important to teach them these kinds of manners and, all of that stuff, which of course those things are very important. But I think it would have been helpful for me to hear that the very first thing that you should teach your child is obedience. It is the foundation of anything and everything you want your child to learn, and how you're going to get them to learn anything is through them obeying your instructions and respecting your authority. Maybe that's obvious, and in a sense, we kind of naturally start on that process because we're encouraging our children to listen to us, and as they get older, we're telling them what to do and we expect them to listen to us. We expect obedience, but we don't see it in a sense as a skill that needs to be cultivated. Not in the same way that we think, teaching them their prayers or teaching them how to dress themselves or how to potty train them or how to say please and thank you. We're training those things in them in a very intentional way, which is good and important, but we don't always see cultivating obedience in that same way. And I think that would be just a benefit to parents and to myself, to hear that the first in a sense skill you could teach your child is obedience. And when I say that, it can sound really vague because how do you teach your kid obedience? And it brought to mind the book 8 Errors Parents Make and How to Avoid Them by Michael Brock. And in it, there are, the 8 pillars, the eight errors that a lot of parents make and kind of their pitfalls and advice. And it's just basically a really good book on advice. And I don't necessarily agree or would do 100% of the things, but I would say that there's a lot of good nuggets in there. And I believe at the very beginning of the book, he talks about training swats is the term that he uses. But essentially, swatting your child's hand or something like that if they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, or say they're doing something that they're not supposed to touch. And regardless or not of, whether you agree with that sort of process, I do think it's important to have some level of training, so he gives an example where you intentionally leave your phone out and you kind of put the child in a place. So let's say it's a 2-year-old. I would say like he starts a lot earlier with, giving examples of when to use like training swats. And yeah, just like if your child's is giving you a hard time, on the change table while you're changing their diaper, like that would be a time where you would reprimand them and give them a little swat or something like that to indicate that that's behavior that is unacceptable, basically. But as they get older, then you start really kind of putting them in positions and putting in them scenarios where they have to practice obedience. So you leave your phone out intentionally and you wait for them to inevitably grab it, and then you ask them for it back. And you don't take it out of their hands, you don't yank it out. And then there's some sort of consequence if they don't do it. Maybe it means that, so in this scenario in the book, they would be administered a swat. If you're not, that's something that you're uncomfortable with, then yeah, I mean, like you could find some other form of discipline, like whether that's like a mini timeout for a few seconds or in a pack and play. And like, it's kind of an indication, anything that is a sort of indication that that is unacceptable behavior. But the point that I'm trying to make is that what I really appreciated about the way to look at that is that obedience, that you can train obedience by teaching them it like a skill. Like, I think people kind of think of it as this sort of like vague notion that it's kind of this sort of quality or character trait that your child just is, hope that is going to be cultivated over time, but that you can actually put them in scenarios and train them to be obedient. That you, just like how you would teach them any other skill where they can practice putting on their clothes, or you give them or you slowly teach them how to recite their prayers by getting them to repeat one line back to you. It's like you can actually create scenarios where you actually can cultivate the skill of obedience. And I think I thought that was a really sort of, how do you say it, mind-blowing in some ways, or just definitely a concept that really kind of opened my eyes a bit, because very rarely do I think we talk about obedience as a skill. Obviously, it's a disposition and a spirit of heart that we need to cultivate as it's at its core. But that sometimes you feel helpless. I think I definitely felt that about the notion of obedience. Like, I felt kind of helpless that it was something that like I couldn't actually cultivate in a sense. Like, I couldn't put my kid in scenarios that would actually cultivate it like a skill, but it's something that kind of would hopefully happen over time if I reprimanded them enough, if I kind of nagged them enough to do something. And so I thought it's just like a helpful way to look at it. And I was thinking about how that is so simple. I found that as a very freeing notion, that the first and most important thing that I have seen is important that we have taught our children, and that continue to bear fruit as we try to teach them more things and explain things to them and get them to do anything, or as we're starting to do homeschooling and stuff like that. It's like all of that would fall apart if they were disobedient, if they did not follow instructions, if they did not do what they were told. And over time, especially as they get older, or as the youngest child starts getting older, you realize how much sooner, in a lot of ways, like a child can learn things, which also might contribute to the fact that they have older siblings and they learn and develop maybe a lot faster because they're picking up on a lot of things that are in front of them. Of course, that's very plausible too, or not just plausible, but that's a real factor in this. But I think at the heart of the matter too is the realization. It's important to come to the realization that your young child is capable of learning so much and is a lot more aware than maybe you think, and to not underestimate their ability to learn things and to cultivate certain skills with them. In particular, obedience, even before they're verbal, like they can't even really talk. Like, maybe they can talk in the sense that they can kind of jumble a few words together, but it's not very cohesive what they're saying. But what they do understand is yes and no, and don't do that, or give me that, especially if it's repeated over time. The same way that they definitely come to understand when their name is being called. And so I would just say that before, like as a new mom, like, or as a mom, kind of entering into the more mature stages of childhood from your child being a baby, is like the first important thing I think you should ever focus on as a parent is cultivating the skill of obedience more than potty training. Like more than potty training, more than teaching them how to write, or teaching them how to make the sign of the cross. I mean, obviously those things are important, and they're probably mixed in with all of that too. But before like stressing in a sense, or being overwhelmed about like, I want to make sure my child has all the skills and tools and they know all the things, like the very first thing that is in a sense, like the easiest, the most straightforward. I don't know about the easiest, actually. The most straightforward, the most financially inexpensive. It's definitely teaching a child the skill of obedience costs significantly less than buying them a learning tower. But realizing that teaching them obedience and obedience to your instruction as parents is the thing that is the most crucial, the most foundational and fundamental thing that you can teach your child, and that it is for their benefit. It is for their good. It is not for our sake, in a sense, that we get maybe a child that listens to us better and therefore less chaos or less stress or less annoyance, and it's more convenient. And maybe that is the fruit of prioritizing teaching your child obedience, which is a beautiful and great fruit. But it's for love of them. It's for their sake. It's for the goodness of them, that bad behavior or disobedient behavior only hurts them. And listening to your instructions from you who love them the most, who hopefully desires their best good and has their best intentions in mind, that it is in their best interest to listen to you, to follow your instructions and do whatever it is that you tell them to do. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope this thought was helpful to you. Honestly, as a new mom, I would have done well to hear this, because there's just so many things that, I don't know, you're kind of like stressed out about, or feel like, my kid's getting older and what am I supposed to do? And what's the first thing, in a sense, and, kind of to teach them all the things of life, right? And I think it would have alleviated a lot. It made a lot of things clearer if I was told that cultivating a heart of obedience is the first thing and most important thing to teach your child for their formation. Thanks for joining me for this musing, folks. Till next time, God bless.